I'm Julia George. This is the Sunday Politics in the South East. Coming up later, new rules to stop thousands of tonnes of fish being thrown overboard. But will it stop the waste? We'll hear from the fishermen of Thanet and from the minister in charge. Joining me in the studio today are two general election candidates. UKIP MEP Janice Atkinson is standing in Folkestone and Hythe, and Clarence Mitchell is the Conservative candidate in the Brighton Pavilion constituency. Welcome to you both. Now, if you have little ones, did you get the primary school you really wanted? And is your once small local school now squeezing in extra classes? A campaign by Labour has highlighted a shortfall of places in the years to come. And the party's candidate for Rochester and Stroud, Nashaba Khan, joins us to talk about this too. But first, let's take a look at the problem. We've spoken to the top-tier authorities in the South East. It's predicted that in the next 5 years, West Sussex will need to find almost 9,000 primary school places. In East Sussex, the figure is more than 6,600. Kent needs to find 15,000. And in Medway, there's a predicted shortfall in primary schools of over 2,700 places. Brighton and Hove predicts no shortfall. Which is very interesting. Everyone has a problem, it seems, except Brighton and Hove. Is that a tribute to forward planning by the Green City Authority? Clarence Mitchell, what do you make of that?
There has been no planning by the Greens. If anything, they've put this problem under the carpet. There is a problem in Brighton. The primary schools are already at bursting point.
So this is wrong, this figure?
There is a problem in Brighton. Some of the primary schools, particularly in the west of the city, in Hove, are reaching bursting point as it is. There's 100 reception year places short already. The secondary schools too, 40% oversubscribed already, over capacity. This is a problem that is not going away. It's only going to get worse in the city, and I'm afraid the Greens have singularly failed to deal with it. OK, so you don't believe their figures. I'm going to ask all of you, including Nashaba Khan, for your policy on school places and your plans to fund it. Let's start with Labour and Nashaba Khan. What are you going to do about the shortage of primary school places, Nashaba?
Well, we've got a very real problem in Medway, not only with primary school places, but the standard of education. And I think part of this is due to national policy, which, led by the Tories, has focused so heavily...
I'm going to stop you absolutely immediately, because what I'm asking you for very, very clearly this morning is your policy on tackling a very specific issue of primary school places. Now, if you want to do the blame game, we can do that later on. But first of all, your policy. What are you going to do about it?
Well, absolutely. I'm just trying to outline the national picture, but what we will do is firstly stop the free school programme, which is where a lot of the money that could be used to build extra capacity has been going. So that's the first place.
So you agree with Tristram Hunt that schools are being built in the wrong places, do you?
I do, because in Medway, we had the council who tried to close down 3 schools only a few years ago, and then had to build an extra school to deal with capacity. Yet we've got 3 schools across the country that just aren't full.
OK, this is a programme about the South East. Of the 7 new schools that will open in Kent next year and the 1 that will open in Medway, the 100 of Cahoo Academy, tell me which one isn't needed.
Well, we do need schools in Medway, that's absolutely true, but there are 3 schools across the country.
No, I'm not interested in across the country, I'm interested in the South East.
They used the budget, but they used the budget that was there for schools across the country.
But clearly the system in the South East and Kent and Medway is working. There are 7 new schools opening in Kent, 1 in Medway, and are you happy to tell me that they are all needed?
It's not working in Medway when you've got children in classrooms of bigger than 30. It's absolutely not working, and not just that, but schools are not adequate, and a lot of them are not up to standard. OK, scrapping free schools is your policy on bringing in more school places, despite the fact that the free schools that are coming in Kent are all needed. It seems a bit contrary. Well, I would disagree, because actually what we're seeing is that a lot of the free schools aren't being full. We've got 1 free school in Medway, and it's hasn't got the pupils to fill it, and it's taking away choice from parents when actually they might want to send their school to a local authority school or an academy, and that free schools just don't deliver that. OK, let's bring Janice Atkinson in. UKIP's plans for creating more primary school places and how you're going to fund them.
OK, we don't have a problem with free schools at all, but the problem in Kent and in Medway as well is that because the Tories are so just so attached to their dogma and their ideology, they're actually preventing Medway and KCC for forward planning. So you can't actually expand. All you can do is expand the existing schools.
Again. So tell me what you're going to do.
Free schools. We don't have a problem with free schools, but we also don't have a problem with the local authorities who are being prevented at the moment for opening new schools. They can only actually expand existing schools. So that means expanding existing schools. Some schools are failing. We would stop that.
Your education spokesman Paul Nuttall issued a statement on primary school places in which he points the finger at children whose mothers were born outside the UK and non-EU migrants who have more children than most Brits. Is this electioneering or the beginning of a policy? You're going to tell people whose mothers weren't born in this country they should have fewer children?
Well, let's go back to the 2012 report for Kent County Council. Back then they said we need an extra 10,000 primary school places in Kent. It's now 15,000. That is due to the high birth rate. So what was...
and they argue it's due to migration from other parts of the country into Kent,
because what
not immigration.
Well, no, it was immigration, because in 2004, 1 million extra people settled.
So what's the policy? It's all very well complaining about immigrants, and your own MP, Douglas Carswell, calls it angry nativism, blaming immigrants for problems that we should be blaming the politicians for.
I'm on record as saying we want the brightest and best from around the world, but we want to choose the numbers that come here. All we want is an Australian-based point system, but all the time that we're wedded to the EU...
But why the mention about who's having the most children? Are you going to have a policy that tells people how many babies they can have?
Of course we don't.
OK, so why bother mentioning it?
I don't know. I haven't seen Paul's comments on that.
OK, they're here if you want to have a look at them later on.
OK,
Clarence Mitchell, your policy for sorting out primary school places and how you're going to fund it.
Obviously, we need to build more schools. Obviously, free schools is an important part of that solution. Labour in Hove, as a small example, this isn't a blame game. This is a practical example of the difficulties that they cause. They wanted more school places in Hove. We suggested there was a sell-off of a council building, which is still going through. The Greens proposed selling it. We said a third of the building, or some of it, should become a free school. Labour, who had campaigned for more school places in that area, then opposed that and voted with the Greens to defeat the whole thing.
OK, we're well into the blame game.
On ideological grounds. There's got to be a practical solution
all right.
here.
The Conservative leader of Surrey County Council says direct funding from government to provide the necessary school places. He shouldn't have to borrow money to do it. Will the Tories give it to him?
The decisions on exactly how the education budget are broken down will come in and will be shown in the manifesto. And in terms of us supporting further building of educational institutions and schools and places for the children that are obviously needed, there needs to be common sense leadership across all the parties here. It's in everybody's interest to come to a decision.
All right. Nobody's talked about money. Nobody's talked about money. In an age of austerity, I don't understand why why we haven't got to a place now where whether all your parties are being clear about whether you'd ring-fence education spending. So let's get a bit more radical. Do we need schools with 2 sessions? Do we need, instead of new schools or expanding schools, bigger class sizes? Anyone got a radical idea? Anyone go for any of those?
No over 30 class sizes. But we've already got the money to do this. It's being siphoned off and ring-fenced.
Anything more radical? I mean, you're promising all sorts of things. Tristram Hunt is promising that you're going to spend money on qualifying more teachers, that you're going to have nurses in every secondary school, and he says he's going to do it with the existing schools budget. What are you going to cut?
Well, look, we've seen that this government have raided the budget that had 400 million in it to expand class sizes, to support schools in building capacity and actually put it into free schools. Now, that money could have been much better spent, and that's what we've got to look at. We've got a limited budget, but we've got to look at where it goes and how it's spent in the areas that need it the most, rather than drive forward ideology.
All right. I did want radical ideas.
Not the right thing.
OK, we will have to draw a line under it there. Nashaba Khan, great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on now to food waste. Do you hate it? You may well approve of a ban on unwanted catches being thrown back in the sea by our fishermen. It's being described as the most dramatic change in a generation. Some say it's long overdue. The discard ban, part of the new EU Common Fisheries Policy, means that all fish caught under the EU quota system will have to be landed rather than dumped at sea. But some in the industry say the ban is being rushed through. In a minute, we'll hear from the government minister in charge of fisheries. But first, Sarah Neville has been to the coast to hear the views from our fishermen.
No fish today. Most of the 25-strong fleet in Ramsgate's tied up due to poor weather. And these inshore fishermen are forecasting more rough seas ahead for them due to the introduction of new EU rules and perhaps, most controversially, the end to dumping unwanted fish in the sea. The ban came into force at New Year for fish such as herring and mackerel. But it's the next phase for species like cod and skate that will most affect vessels in Kent and Sussex. Trials are underway. One government agency's been looking at it since 2011. But the industry still has serious questions about how a ban can work. And some say time's running out, with detailed plans due to be submitted by DEFRA to Europe by June.
The dominant feeling within the industry is uncertainty. We don't know. We know that there's this European level obligation to land quota species, but what we don't know are the detailed rules, which species in which year, what exemptions there will be, what the quota management rules will be. So I think there's a great deal of anxiety and the inability to, at this stage, plan.
Discarding fish due to strict EU quotas has been going on for years. In 2012, half of all fish caught in the North Sea was discarded. That's more than 120,000 tonnes. The intention of the EU ruling is to encourage fishermen to be more selective. Currently, if the catch contains damaged or undersized fish, or if the vessel's already reached its quota, then that unwanted fish goes back in the sea. Under the new regulations, the boats will have to land that fish and find a way of disposing of it.
If we discard fish back into the ecosystem, so other fish feed on what's dead and goes back. At the moment, if we're going to have to bring it ashore, all that's going to happen to it is going to go to landfill, and the only benefit of that is for the seagulls.
So, do we need to change our relationship with the sea? These striking images of celebrities such as Gillian Anderson, Michael Gambon and Jerry Hall are part of the Fish Love campaign, aiming to protect the oceans. It was founded by Brighton sushi restaurateur Nicholas Roll.
One of the campaigns that Fish Love got behind was the ban on discards. Discards is wrong. It's crazy.
He deals direct with local sustainable fishermen and thinks the inshore fleets should use the ban to their advantage.
I would encourage the local fishermen, inshore fishermen, to adapt to this discard ban and make it work for them, because ultimately I believe that the industry is still not sustainable.
The government says it's working with marine scientists and the industry to help fishermen adjust to the new reforms. But the question remains, can this major change be made to work?
Well, the Fisheries Minister, George Eustace, joins us from Cornwall now. Mr Eustace, nice to have you with us on the Sunday Politics. Let me ask you, nobody wants fish to be wasted, obviously. Are you convinced this is a better system?
I'm absolutely convinced that this is the right thing to do. I think it's shameful that we've had a system that for so many years has forced and required fishermen to throw perfectly good fish dead back into the water. It's one of the key reasons we've not had sustainable fisheries. And if we want to move to a sustainable system, I think we've got to have that ban on discards. And alongside that, we've got to introduce flexibilities in the quota system so that it works in practice as well as in theory. And that's exactly what we've done. And it's why we've gone to consultation this week to start that process of working out how to implement this. OK,
perhaps we could talk some more about the quota system in a moment. But we heard there in the film the idea that instead of dumping at sea, we would see dumping of surplus fish on land. When it goes back into the sea, it goes back into the ecosystem. That's the argument we heard there. It's not necessarily better to land the fish and then dump it, is it?
Well, the point is, if you catch a fish at sea and dump it back, you're adding to fishing mortality, and that's affecting the sustainability of the stocks. So what we want to do with this, and the purpose of this policy, is effectively to encourage fishermen to fish more selectively, to use more selective net gears. And we've got CFAS, which is a government agency that leads research on this, doing a huge amount of work to get more selective fish gear. It may mean that fishermen need to change their practices and perhaps take a little bit longer to fish more selectively to catch the fish that that they want. But that'll be the right thing to do for the marine environment. And when it comes to fish coming ashore, I don't accept this idea that they'll be dumped in landfill. We've actually got processing capacity. We will see more small fish for which there's no market, possibly going into, you know, for instance, fish processing for fish meal and the like. But it will still be better than dumping it at sea, dead back into the sea, where you know, it's causing just damage to the marine environment.
OK, in terms of being more selective, the fish we're talking about for the Kent and Sussex fishermen is the fish that the ban comes in January 2016. It's cod and skate and those sorts of fish. As I understand it, that they swim together. It's very much more difficult to be selective.
Absolutely, and that's recognised in the system. So, for instance, we've done a number of things. First of all, to recognise that they won't be dumping fish back into the sea, there will be an uplift in quota. So fishermen will actually get slightly more quota in recognition of the fact that they're not dumping fish back into the sea. The second thing we're doing is where fish swim together, so cod, haddock and whiting, they are in a mixed fishery. What we're saying to fishermen is you can count some of your cod quota against haddock, so that if you catch lots more haddock than you expected, rather than dump it, you can say, well, let's mark that off against cod or whiting, for which we do have quota. Having those sorts of flexibilities means that we can make a reality of a discard ban in a mixed fishery. And the final thing that we also say is where there's high survivability, there'll be an exemption. So some flatfish species, like plaice, like sole, actually have high survivability rates if they're put back into the sea. They actually can live another day. And actually we're saying they'll be exempt from the discard ban where you've got that high survivability rate. So there's lots and lots of flexibilities and exemptions that will make this work, even in a mixed fishery.
Now, all of this is under the umbrella of the EU fishing quotas. But should we be questioning the quota system itself? Because we will hear the argument, I'm sure, from UKIP in just a moment, that our fishermen would be better off having sole control of our territorial waters.
Well, look, we've got access for some boats in our waters, but most of those access agreements predate the common fisheries policy. We get quite a lot of Dutch boats in the Bristol Channel, for instance, but those are rights that were established in the 50s and 60s. And all I would say to those who say just come out of the CFP altogether, you don't get rid of those arguments. Where we are fishing in international waters, you will have arguments and debates. This year, we've had arguments with Norway, we've had arguments with Iceland, we've had arguments with the Faroes. You still, at some point, have to have an international agreement about what quota different countries will take. And my view is, in a reformed CFP, we might as well do it within that umbrella framework.
There's much talk among Conservatives of reforming all sorts of aspects of our relationship with the EU. Is everyone as convinced that it needs reform as you are?
Look, I'm a big supporter of EU reform, and I actually quite often hold up what we've achieved on common fisheries policy as something that we could try in other areas, such as, for instance, agriculture, because what we've got now with the CFP is a European objective, which is to fish sustainably to what we call maximum sustainable yield. And then we've allowed nation-states to work out multilaterally among themselves how to deliver that sustainable policy. There's much more now national control and national decision-making and decision between national governments about how we make these policies work, and that's a big step forward.
George Eustace, thank you. George Eustace there, the Fisheries Minister. So I'd like to pick up with you, Janice Atkinson, just on this issue of discards. Do you agree that this is a mistake to be throwing fish back in the sea?
Oh, absolutely, because there's no scientific base to see that they actually live. But you can't just get rid of the discard ban and all the while that you've got quotas in place, because if our fishermen go out, and we're talking about the trawlermen like you saw John Nichols from Folkestone, they've only got 10-metre boats, so they only have so much time at sea. So suddenly they get their quota in one day, then that's it, they can't go out. And also the restaurateur is saying that they want to sell those other species on.
Tastes.
Yeah, but you've got to educate the public to do that. That takes a while, but it's not going to work all the while that you've got quotas in place.
But you heard the Fisheries Minister there saying the discard ban is an example of how successful EU negotiation can be. You'd rather we left the EU, but negotiation over fish stocks and fish rights, he says, predates all of that.
He hasn't negotiated it. He's had to send a letter to the Commission to get this approved, and at the moment they haven't approved it because it's in June. And the Fisheries Committee... committee
hasn't been approved.
No, it hasn't been approved, absolutely. And the fishing committee is actually made up of French, Portuguese and Spanish, and they will not have this renegotiation. All we're asking for is for our fishermen, and I don't make the policy, I listen to my fishermen. I had a meeting, a public meeting 2 weeks ago where over 100 people came. The fishermen asked me for the public meeting. It's the fishermen that want to come out of the common fisheries policy, not just UKIP.
OK, the fishermen in our report there seem wedded, Clarence, to the idea that there's no alternative but to waste unwanted fish, either throw it away in the sea or throw it away on land. There surely is a smarter way, though, isn't there? I mean, fish strategically, throw back the ones that can survive, offset some species against the other. So if you catch too many cod, you can call it a haddock. I don't know how that works, but it sounds like that's what we're going to do. And change consumer taste. Clearly,
a lot of the detail of this has to be worked out, and the emphasis now from DEFRA, from the government, should be to help the industry come to terms with the bans. The bans are in. They themselves are a tribute to the negotiation that did take place on the CFP.
So you say this is a good example of negotiating
yes, it needed reform, and it's not just on the actual discard ban coming in. It's removed a lot of the micromanagement, the inefficient micromanagement that we saw from Brussels. That's gone. There's much more national aspects to this, enabling countries to work on their own fisheries together. So it's a good thing overall. Okay. But the emphasis now should be on implementation with assistance from government rather than heavy-handed enforcement. OK. Thank you both very much indeed. Shall we now take a gallop through the other political stories you might have missed this week? Here's James Fitzgerald.
Following these protests, West Sussex County Council voted to add its name to the list of authorities who oppose a second runway at Gatwick.
It is a vote that members wanted. Obviously, the people they represent very much wanted that, and it was a free vote.
The Howard League claims that Elmley Prison had England's joint worst suicide rate last year, blaming low staffing.
Suicides is yet another barometer of that, because these are preventable deaths.
Motorway misery. Operation Stack was in force in Kent to alleviate pressure on the Channel Tunnel after power issues. After investment from EDF, the life of a Kent nuclear plant is to be extended by 10 years. Dungeness B had been due to close in 2018.
We invest £40 million into the local economy every year, so you can do the numbers for another 10 years.
And the South East's anti-fracking campaigners celebrated news from the other end of the country. A report in Lancashire recommended the County Council refuse a licence for exploratory drilling.
Fracking and stacking, forgive me. Let's start with the lorries on the M20. A few days of pain, and it's been really awful, hasn't it, for people across most of Kent. But do we really want to concrete over huge areas of the county to create lorry parks for occasional use, Janice?
It's just got to be managed better. If we actually charge foreign lorries coming into Dover, and we can do this with the Dartford crossing technology, then that will alleviate some of the pain. It actually costs £4 to £5 million a day to have this stack, and 80% of those lorries. I came past there on Friday. I've never seen anything like it. It was just really, really weird. But that costs £4 or £5 million a day. It's £15,000 in police time. The police should actually be policing and not policing stacks.
Clarence, what should we do? Do we have lorry parks?
Where they would work, it's not a bad idea in principle, but obviously we can see that the practicalities of it as it currently stands are leading to this immense clag that just sits there. No, you know, where the government is investing in infrastructure, we want a better road system overall.
I don't know if people who live nearby will want them. We didn't get time for fracking. We'll come back to it, I'm sure. Thank you both very much indeed. That's all we've got time for from the South East this week. My thanks to our guests, Clarence Mitchell and Janice Atkinson. And Natalie will be here next week with more politics from the South East. Thanks for watching.